there guys, this is me, Malorian, and it's time for another video for new War Machine players. Although, to be fair, this one's going to be a little bit more advanced. Now, this question comes from Daryl Duncan, and it has really to do with the specifics and what you're allowed to do during a charge action. And what I thought I'd do is, instead of taking this very specific scenario, why don't we just open this up and let's just explain an activation? Because, to be fair, as much to a new player or even a moderate player, an activation must seem like a very simple thing. The problem is that it actually is broken up to a lot of small little parts, and if you understand the full activation and all the terminology you're going through, then it'll be a lot easier, so that when you're having these rules interactions, it'll be super clear what happens where and what you're allowed to do. So again, we're going to cover it all. And I think you're going to see that whereas like right now you might be like, Malorian, you're wasting my time. But by the time we get to the end of this, you'll be like, oh, wow, okay, that makes a lot more sense now. So let's start from the very, very beginning, which is the start of the activation. As a player, you're saying, I'm going to be activating this model or this unit, and that already could have a trigger. So basically, if you're under a feat, or maybe something else like that that says, say like Gremlin Swarms, that if a model activates within base-to-base contact, or maybe it's a feat, you might be in control range, X happens. So right away in that very first step, an activation could already be a trigger. Now, after this, what you're allowed to do is your movement. So whether you're going to be forfeiting it to aim, whether you're going to be moving somewhere, whether you're going to be doing an order, which is going to allow you to do a charge or a run or something like that, that's going to be in this section here. Now, that could already have some interactions at that movement step there. Maybe there's something that's stopping you from charges or something like that. But most of the interactions around the movement is going to be happening in the end. There's a lot of things saying if you end your movement within X or within this area, something's going to happen. Or if you enter during your movement, this is going to happen. So let's say that there's a cloud. If the cloud says that if you enter or end in here, you take your corrosion damage, well, if you run through the cloud, you ran through it. Or maybe it's something where you ended your activation within 6 inches of a Toro and you got counter charge. So those part there, where saying for the movement about whether you're entering or whether you're ending, very specific triggers around your movement, and can be very specific things of what can actually interact with you coming back the other way. Now, once you're done with your movement piece of your turn, the next part is now going to be your attack. And again, that sounds like it's very easy, but can be a little bit more complicated. First of all, one of the things I want to make sure that is known is that unless you have different rules, if you're making a melee attack, you cannot also make a range attack. So you have to choose which one you're going to do. As well, you might have the option of doing a star attack or a star action. Now, if you're going to be doing a star attack, what that's going to be doing is replacing all your initial attacks. So if you have 2 weapons and one of them has a star attack, by doing that star attack, that is now taking up both of them. Now, if you're something we can buy attacks after, you can be doing that, but the other side, if it's a star action, that forfeits all of it. So you're going to be just basically moving up. You can't run, you can't charge. You're going to be doing a star action, and that's going to replace all of it. All of your attacks will do this one star action. There's no buying attacks after, like a star attack. It's just, this is the action you're going to take. Now, when it comes to a regular attack, even that needs to be broken down a little bit more than just I'm making an attack. The very first thing you're going to be doing is targeting a model, saying that I am attacking you. And that step is very important because there's already some things that might be interacting with that. There are certain things that say, if I'm targeting you, say like for something like that can negate that arcane spell, as soon as that attack is declared before any dice is rolled, they can now say, no, I'm going to be spending this focus to negate that attack, or what have you. There's some triggers around just targeting. Now, after that, you will say, okay, I'm targeting you. I now am going to roll to hit. And once you actually hit or miss, that could also trigger something else. So, for example, it could be that when you get hit, now all of a sudden you can do something around that. Could also be that if you miss, something comes off and goes around that. So a very important trigger. The next part's going to be the damage. So after you hit, you have to roll damage. And once you damage something, again, depending on what the terminology is on the other side, doing damage to something could also do a trigger on the other side. Now, once that's all done, the attack is resolved. And that's another one that's important, a very important term, because that also then speaks to this attack is resolved. If you have multiple attacks, each one is being done and then resolved. And so if there's some sort of counter rule that's saying after an attack is resolved, X will happen, just know that that's at the end there. It's not after all the attacks. It's not after you hit. It's not really even after you just completely damage. Anything else that's going to be happening with that one attack, once it's resolved, that's when you're going to be doing that last piece there. And then after that, you can be buying attacks. You might be able to do other things as well. But that's basically how an activation goes. Now, some of the things are kind of more interesting because they can be done in multiple ways in that activation, is that you can be doing things that are feats and spells, and there's some other abilities that can be all the way in there as well. And I guess one thing I should be talking about before I go too far is just a different terminology for when you actually destroy something. So let's do that before I get to the spells and feats. So there's three very key terms. There's disabled, there's boxed, and there's destroyed. When I was a new player, it seemed really weird that there's all these different terminology for the way things die, but that's because there's so many triggers on the way that things die that it's very important to try and break these up to really show that if something happens before the other. So, for example, if you have one rule that triggers on disabled and another rule that triggers on boxed, you do that disabled one before the boxed. So maybe the disabled one is a tough test. Maybe it's something else. But you do that before you get to the next one because these are different steps. So for those who always have like a trouble remembering this, just remember that like there's a D on either side. So the box is always in the middle. And then clearly being destroyed is worse for you than being disabled. So that's why it goes disabled, box, destroyed. And if you need help as a new player, you can always write these things down, right? There's nothing stopping you writing a little cheat sheet for yourself saying this is the stages that a turn goes, these are the stages that an activation goes, and use those as like a little card cheat sheet to go through this to remember all these things. Don't feel bad about this. It's a complex game and you're trying to learn the rules. Now, I was getting to all these exceptions, like the feats and the spells and the abilities that can be done anytime during an activation. So for these, they can really go into any spot you want except for during an attack. So what that really means is if I'm a caster, I could be casting a spell or popping a feat. I could then move somewhere. I could cast a spell. I could make an attack. I could then do another spell, I could buy an attack, maybe do another spell, but in any one of those places there, between those steps, I can actually do one of those other things. I can be, of course, only popping my feet once, but these spells can be happening all over the place. So that could be very interesting for like a flashing blade where you're attacking all these things around yourself. I might do a flashing blade, kill all these things around me, move over here, do another flashing blade. That might trigger something like a warpath or something where I get to move somewhere, and then I might buy attack. I might then do another flashing blade. But those spells can be anywhere in any one of those points, and you can mix those up however you want. The important thing to remember, though, is that you can't break up an attack. So a very clear example of this, and the thing that made me learn this, is something like, say, with Lilith. Something that has Witch Mark, where if I go and actually hit something, I can cast a spell for free. So what would be awesome is that I shoot something, I then put something like Parasite on it to lower its armor, and then now when I get to my damage roll, it's easier to damage it. That'd be fantastic. However, it's not the way it works. You have to resolve the attack, and then you're at another spot where you can be casting spells. So in that situation, if I shoot one model of a unit and it dies, I can now not be casting Parasite on it because it's dead. It's not there. Whereas if I was to shoot something and it was to tough and survive that, now I can go and do Parasite. Or maybe I shot a Jack and I did a little bit of damage. Well, now I can do Parasite on it after. So it can't be broken anywhere there in between. Now, I think another thing to remember is that just like how there's a start of activation, there's also an end of activation. And it's very important to understand what type of things will end an activation. Now, some of these things will be very simply, you're now done activating the unit. So maybe your caster or a unit went and did its thing. You are now done. You're now at end of activation. And there's other rules that might apply to that. Maybe it has repo or something like that. But something else to remember with this as well is things like if you are to run, as soon as you're done moving, your activation ends. If you ever fail a charge, your activation ends. That's why when you're doing things like maybe casting spells, popping a feat, even like riling on a beast, you have to do those things before you run or charge. So for example, if I'm wanting to pop my feat with Magnus 2 and applying it over there, I can't run and then feat. I can't charge, fail a charge, and then feat because my activation's over. I would have to first pop my feat, choose something to charge because I can't pop my feet and run. That's just one of the rules of feats, not really important here, but I'd have to pop my feet, charge something, fail the charge, and my feet is still there because I had cast it or done it before I actually charged. So that's very, very important. Now, something else that can be important is for those abilities. So I talked about feats and spells, but there's also abilities that says anytime during its activation, it can do X. Now, again, it can be very important that you can't do these things after your activation runs. So let's say the unit wants to do one of these abilities, but it's running. What I can do is run, but on that model that has that rule, before it runs, do that ability and then run after. I think a very good example of this one is there's one with the unit attachment in Signar with Murdoch, where what it can do is anytime there's activation, they can dig in. So one of the things you can do is that if you were to pop that in the very beginning, they'd all dig in, and then if you move, they basically all get out of their holes and they no longer have cover. What you could do is move all those other models first, then Murdoch goes, and then he pops his little feet, and then all those people are up there in advance, and they're on the little holes, and everybody's happy. So that whole end of activation thing, and somewhere within the activation, just kind of remember how that works, that there's those different pieces, you know, your start of activation, your movement, then you have your attack, and then your end of activation, and just those, even those little pieces of how your attack goes, where you're declaring the attack, you're rolling to hit, you're rolling damage, you're resolving the attack, the disabled box destroyed. All those terminology as a brand new player might seem like, yeah, I roll dice, you take things off, but those terminology are key when it comes to those interactions. And so all of a sudden, if you're wanting to get that higher level play, they are absolutely critical. So let's take that. There's the lesson. But let's now read the actual question and we'll apply these rules to what Daryl asked. And what the question here is, something that really got me was the thing on the timing on a charge action. When can you do what? What can you do before the attack? That kind of thing. So let's kind of break this down, and let's say that your caster is Magnus 2, and I want to charge up. There's nothing in charge range, so I'm going to be failing a charge, and I want to be doing my feat. Well, what I could be doing is I could be popping my feet, like I said. I will charge, and then I'll be able to get up there, and then once that's done, if there's anything ending with that, fine, that's great. So let's go and make this even more complicated. Let's say I am charging something and there's also a Toro to countercharge me. Well, if we were to go and do this, if I was going to have a model that's going to be charging something else, so Magnus charges a Mangler, gets in range, ends its movement, There's a rule on the Toro for countercharge that when an enemy model ends its movement within 6 inches, it can countercharge. It now countercharges Magnus. Now Magnus is charging the Mangler, but before it can make its attack, we have to resolve the countercharge. So basically, you would make the countercharge attack, and then, assuming Magnus survives, Magnus could keep on going. Now, before you start that attack, because again, you've just done the movement portion, you could pop your feet, you could cast a spell, you could do all these things, but then once you start the attack, you can't do anything in between until you resolve the attack. So that's how those things break up, and that's how they work. Now, I think the last thing you have to keep in mind when you're looking with all these terminologies is what do you do if there's 2 competing rules at the same time? So let's say, for example, something says that when I hit, there's a trigger on my rules and there's a trigger on my enemy's rules. Well, the way that you actually resolve that is that whoever is the active player, theirs resolves first. So that way, I'm getting my full benefit of mine as the active player before your happens. If, let's say there's 2 of mine, let's say I'm going in, and when I hit, or whatever trigger, what step I'm on, I have 2 different rule triggers happening at the same time. As me, as the active player, I can choose which way that's going to order. So here's a good example. For something like Savio Acosta, when he gets missed by an attack, he has dodge, which allows him to move 2 inches, and he also has the rule that lets him swing back. They are both on when they're missed by an attack. So, let's say, for example, I am in range and I can be swinging at them from where I am. I might want to swing first, do some damage, and then dodge away so that I can't be hit anymore. Or maybe I am out of range to swing my own sword, so I'm going to first dodge forward and then I'm going to swing my sword. So again, knowing that what that trigger is, knowing that's the same time, and knowing that I have the control as the active player to sort those in any order I want, critically important. And sometimes that's the difference between winning and losing a game. So there you go. This is a longer video than the ones I've done, but like I said, this is kind of a more advanced thing. As a new player coming in, this is something it's good to kind of know, but you're probably not going to be getting into this until you learn all your basics. But anyway, there you go, Daryl. I hopefully answered your question, and hopefully in your next game, you'll charge me and kick my ass. Bye.